but it sounds absolutely fantastic. It's such a great experience. Unfortunately, again, he also died. He had recently been through a divorce.
Hola, Jefe. Welcome to a Thursday Collection Connection, which is a game that I made up and I play with my brother, Plastic Eric, from the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel. How do you play? How do you score? How do you win? I hear you asking. Well, we have a bunch of rules laid out. You can read about them in the description, but basically it's like a tennis match where I show an album and Eric has to find some connection to an album in his collection, and then that gets volleyed back over to me, and I volley it back over to him. And who scores, who wins, I don't know. I think it's, again, like a tennis point. When somebody drops the ball, then we'll know the score. But you'll find that for all the rules, really, it's just an excuse to talk about records. So in Eric's last volley, he played Michael Hedges, Breakfast in the Field. Kind of a new age, but not new age, definitely on the Windham Hill label. Weirdly, I have a Michael Hedges album, even though it's not really anything that's in my wheelhouse. I'm not sure how he came by it. It's like live on the Double Planet or something like that. But it's a live album. It is, I find that kind of music probably best used as score. There were a couple of tracks that stood out, as having a shape and form and things like the Funky Avocado, just an interesting name, but how the titles lend themselves to the songs, I'm not sure what Michael Hedges was thinking about when he assigned those titles, but that kind of standout title, notable title, I should say, went along with a song that had a lot of personality. But by and large, not the kind of music I sit down to listen to when I'm listening to music, but maybe the kind of music that I would put on when I am doing other things and don't want to be distracted by the music, just kind of pleasant sounds. A lot of that new age area music feels off the cuff in a way that I always have a hard time imagining them doing it in concert. Like it's not just sort of bling on the moment, and yeah, who knows? Yikes. But getting to the meat of it, it was a tough album to connect because there wasn't a lot of people on it, not a lot of people involved. It's in a genre that I don't necessarily listen to. I did notice that George Winston, who is probably the standout label artist on Windham Hill, who plays piano, does play piano apparently on some of the tracks, but it was just Michael Hedges and a bassist and George Winston on piano were the only musicians listed on the album. So not a lot of personnel to connect to. I thought briefly about the fact that his last name is sort of a present tense, third person verb, like Michael Hedges his bets. And I thought I could connect to a similar name like Ben Folds or Tom Waits. But I just done a wordplay one, so that felt a little too soon, which didn't leave me with a ton. But I did, as I thought about the album, notice that there are no drums. There's no drummer listed, no percussionist listed. It is a drum and percussion and drum machine free album. So I thought, well, maybe that's something. Let me look through my stuff. Unfortunately, it's the kind of thing that's, again, I keep picking these things that are hard to just kind of Google. You have to listen to a few things and see whether or not they have percussion on them. You can look at the liner notes, which I did, and it kind of knocked out a few kind of, I thought maybe folky kind of artists, but even the artists who have some of the tracks on the album, like Tracy Chapman or Billy Bragg, early David Gray, all seem to have some percussion somewhere on the album, even though some of the tracks were percussion free. And I'm not quite sure how I stumbled on to checking this one out, but I did come up with one, and it is a surprising one to me. And it's an album that I never would have guessed that I would be able to connect to anything, because it's not a prominent album in my mind, in my collection, or anything. And it's an obscure artist. And the artist is Hamel on Trial. And the album is Big as Life. This album first came out in 1994. It was released on Doolittle Records. And in the following year, 1995, the rights to the album were bought out by the Mercury label. It is the Mercury version that I own, but I will put, since it did come out earlier than that, 1994 on the graphic for its indie release. Kind of like the Michael Hedges, it's surprised. I can't think of why this ended up in my collection in the first place. I know I bought it at the time that it was contemporaneous, at the time that it was current. And that would have been the time when my wife and I were kind of at our poorest, you really have to think about what it is that you want to spend your money on. And so I was much less likely to take random risks on things that perhaps looked promising. And yet the single from here appeared to be the first track, called Sugar Free, which is a kind of a Nirvana clone. And Nirvana's never been my super favorite. I don't own any Nirvana albums. And so I wouldn't think that that was what appealed to me. And it sounds funny that it sounds very Nirvana, but has no percussion on it. But somewhat, again, like the Michael Hedges, the guitar playing itself is somewhat percussive. And he does a lot of fast strumming to create rhythm on his guitar. His delivery is similar to the Ed Haynes that I talked about a few weeks ago. Kind of storytellery, not as overtly silly. There's some humor, but it's more cynical humor, I think. With the exception of the track, I think, Xerox, which is spelled Zroxx because he did not have permission to use the word, the name of the company, Xerox. So it's one of those, like Dada's Disneyland, that had to spell that all funky, because clearly they're talking about the brand that you're familiar with, but they don't have permission to use it. And that one, he talks about, I don't give a crap about your band, and how derivative, makes me think a little bit of Dandy Warhol's Bohemian Like You. A lot of the other songs are sort of Lou Reed-esque, like gritty tales from the city, kind of the lower reaches of society, drug and crime tales that are still told with a lot of sharp eye, personality, detail. They're engaging. I will give it, they're engaging. One song is just straight up. So he's sort of like a spoken word artist at times, almost. And perhaps the biggest turnoff is that to deliver the kind of lyrics that he writes feels smug. Like, I don't know, I guess you have to be sort of confident, as a storyteller, if that is going to be the way that you deliver your songs. But it feels like he is impressed with himself at times. And there's a smugness that is a little hard to overcome. It feels very mannered. There is one track, Harmony, the second track on the album, that I do like a lot. And I like several of the tracks, but I like it better when he does more singing, which he does on a portion of the tracks, or sometimes he does kind of a spoken verse, sung chorus kind of deal, like on the title track, Big as Life, which is interesting in its subject matter. It's a song about representation in media, which sounds like an odd topic. And again, not 100% comfortable with how he presents it, but because it feels a little smug, but hey, it's taken on a topic that is important and pervasive to this day. And so even though it kind of comes to a conclusion that is a little trite and not as satisfying as the rest of the story, it's not a bad song, and it's got a good chorus on that song. Piccolo Joe is just basically a poem recitation with a music background. Again, kind of about a drug dealer, and it closes the album with an unlisted track, which is a partial cover of Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues, basically like the first verse and a half of Folsom Prison Blues. And I like that. It's a very propulsive little cover of that song, but it's done in part uh, with, again, sort of a more like a stage patter opening that is obviously recorded, but recorded to sound off the cuff. Strange little album overall. Hamill on Trial. He's Ed Hamill is the name of the guy, and Hamill on Trial is not a band as far as I'm aware. It is just sort of his stage name. It's not quite like Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails. It just feels like that's the name that he wants to perform under. Ed Hamill performs under the name Hamill on Trial, which again, a little precious, but what are you going to do? But it is interesting. It was fun to pull it out, listen to it. Maybe another toughie for Eric to volley back come Monday on his turn. But we will see. So yeah, no drums, no percussion, no drum machines. So it's like hard folk. Just like the Michael Hedges didn't consider himself New Age. He said heavy mental, things like that. So it's surprising that there are no drums or percussion on the album. But there you go. Eric will have to connect to Hamill on Trial's Big as Life from 1995. And you can look for that response on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel on Monday. And with that, that's all I got. So thank you for watching. Bye-bye.